and welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles, and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of Deep South Texas. Got a great program lined up for you today. Our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendez, is going to be joining us to lead a conversation with Mr. Michael Ballard, who is the Director of Intelligence at Global Guardian. So we're really looking forward to that conversation. But first, let's take a look at some of the headlines making news across the border, beginning with the government may have shut down last night at midnight Eastern time, but the Border Patrol, ICE, and other immigration-related agencies are still at work. Now, Homeland Security says immigration and border operations will continue, but officers and agents will not be paid until the government reopens. Now, our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez, has been kind of going up and down the border and visiting the different crossing areas and, just keeping an eye on what things look like out there. And she said as of right now, as of today, everything looks as business as usual for those agents working along the border. Many Homeland Security agencies are deemed necessary to protect life and property and therefore will continue through a shutdown. Also happening in Oregon, the state has filed a motion for a temporary restraining order against the deployment of federal troops in Portland. Now, the Attorney General there says the decision is, the Attorney General says the decision is unlawful and poses a substantial risk to its residents. Meantime, protests have continued outside the ICE building in South Portland. The protests have been taking place since the weekend when President Donald Trump announced plans to send the National Guard to the city. While the president says the city is the headquarters of the far left, Democratic lawmakers are urging him to stay out of Portland, saying the city has had the largest drop in murder rates in the country. Also happening, federal immigration officials have revealed plans to reopen the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program to new applicants to comply with a court order. But they do warn the Trump administration retains the discretion to modify the Obama-era policy. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services have made plans to accept and process new DACA applications from migrants not enrolled in the initiative. Currently, there's more than 500,000 so-called dreamers to live and work in the U.S., and these dreamers are allowed to do that without fear of deportation thanks to this DACA program. Now, you'll recall dreamers are migrants that as children entered or were brought to the U.S. illegally by adults or overstayed their visas. The Obama administration created DACA in 2012 to protect the population from deportation amid congressional gridlock on immigration reform. Time now to bring in our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendez, to introduce Mr. Michael Ballard, Director of Intelligence at Global Guardian. How y'all doing?
Really good to be back. Yes, I have worked with Mr. Michael Ballard and with Global Guardian for a while now. And he is really one of the go-to persons when it comes to what's going on in terms of security risk throughout not just Latin America, but all over the world. And the reason we invited Mr. Ballard today is because Global Guardian has just published a new risk assessment map, which includes some interesting news about three countries in Latin America where U.S. residents, U.S. citizens maybe as well, have a strong either business or family ties to. One of them is Haiti, the other one is Venezuela, and the third one is obviously Mexico. So, Mr. Ballard, can you tell us a little bit about the reasons Global Guardian puts out this map? And then can you kind of like go into some of the three countries that we mentioned?
Yeah, 100%. Thank you so much for having me. So we do publish a risk map every year. We kind of have a traditional side to it of your, low, medium, high, and extreme risk countries all over the world. And then we focus in on a specific kind of subtopic. This year, we looked at terrorism, where it's gotten worse, where it's gotten better, where it's an endemic problem. No real surprises there. You've got, countries in the Sahel in Africa, right? Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Somalia, Nigeria has issues with Boko Haram. And, the locus of terrorism that was in Syria and Iraq with ISIS has kind of shifted. And we're looking at, how this may impact security going forward when you have terrorist organizations that are kind of operating with relative impunity in places like Mali, Niger, Somalia, et cetera. What I think is interesting looking at those three countries that you mentioned, Haiti, Venezuela, and Mexico is that now all three have groups, drug cartels or gangs or organized crime groups that have been designated as foreign terrorist organizations by the United States of America, the DOJ, and the State Department. You know, Haiti is, practically a failed state in many regards. And, I recently saw that the UN kind of approved an additional 5,500 or so troops to deploy there to try and shore up the Kenyan mission that is kind of peace mission that's being led there. I don't think it's going to have too much effect, honestly. You need a really significant deployment of security personnel to really make a big difference, and in order to allow the government to really function properly there. So, that's where we're at in Haiti, and I can chat about Mexico and Venezuela.
Yeah, let's talk about Venezuela because we've had some breaking news in the past few weeks involving U.S. strikes on ships allegedly being operated by the Tren de Aragua criminal organization. What is the latest that you've heard on that? I understand we now have three. The third strike has been confirmed. What's going on right now, and what's coming next?
Yeah, the situation there is very, very interesting for us. We don't have a ton of clients that operate in Venezuela itself, but we have clients that operate in neighboring Guyana, right? And there's the tension and the friction over that disputed region. We have clients that operate in Colombia and other neighbors of Venezuela. But you're right; these three now airstrikes or takedowns of these narco boats with alleged drug traffickers from Tren de Aragua, one of the groups that has been designated as an FTO. And this kind of coincides with a relatively large deployment of, I think, some 6,500 troops, U.S. troops, into the Caribbean region. You have U.S. Navy warships that are now there. Part of this is to counter narcotics operations, right? Just trying to limit the flow of drugs out of Venezuela into the Caribbean and into the United States. Part of it's also, sending a message to President Maduro, who the U.S. government views largely as illegitimate. And, there have been some developments in just the last several days where the president of the National Assembly of Venezuela said that President Maduro had a decree ready to go, kind of on standby, that would basically be a general mobilization for the country of Venezuela should the U.S. take further steps to either invade, carry out special forces operations, covert missions within the country. There are rumors that the Venezuelan government is handing out rifles and handguns to civilians, right, to try and arm the population. It's a very interesting time right now there.
Yeah, one of my specialties is monitoring what's going on in the specific countries in Latin America. And I have run across those reports. There's certainly been rallies on the streets of Venezuelan cities in support of Maduro, chanting anti-American slogans and all that. So definitely something's brewing. The environment is right for something to happen. Now that's on the Venezuelan side. What do you think is our next move as far as the U.S. government, the Trump administration? With Venezuela?
Yeah, I think you're going to see a slow but steady escalation here. You have, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who's also the acting national security advisor. He's a well-known Venezuelan hawk, right? And he's kind of been pushing for, not pushing for regime change, but he's been very, very critical of Maduro, critical of the Venezuelan state as a de facto kind of narco state. We think that's probably how most of the military officers and many of them kind of maintain their lifestyle through the collapse of their currency several years ago and the drop. Their economy had basically crashed. That was kind of how they maintained power there and maintained spending power, as it were. But we think that all signs point to, the U.S. Not just focusing on Venezuela, but part of a larger strategy to really regain control and influence over the Western Hemisphere, and having, I don't call it a rogue nation, but potentially like Maduro's Venezuela, doesn't really fit with that, that kind of model of what they're looking at in the Western Hemisphere. So I don't know exactly what's next, but it wouldn't surprise me if before this Trump administration is over, I would be shocked if we don't see some really material effort to either, depose Maduro from within, forcibly remove him, take him out, as a head of a cartel. Effectively, that's kind of how he's been viewed, right? The head of a cartel / terrorist organization. So I think there's definitely something brewing there.
Right. Finally, what advice would you give those Venezuelans in the U.S. who have family in Venezuela and those American businessmen, perhaps in the oil industry, that have some business interest? Would you tell them not to travel right now, or what? What would you tell them?
Yeah, it's a tough call. We get questions like this all the time. Clients of ours who they live in the U.S., but they have extended family that are in some of these countries. They're in Venezuela, Iran. They're in some of these places that are, hostile to Americans. I think we always kind of err on the side of caution, and that if you are an American with family there, I would probably not visit. There's a likelihood that you could get detained, arbitrary detention. There are issues with that with China as well that we often warn about, especially if you're Chinese American. They ignore your American citizenship, right? They don't apply any of those laws to that. If you're a businessman, if you have oil and gas interests in Venezuela, that's a more complicated situation, right? In many ways, Venezuela is still pretty reliant on oil and gas exports for foreign currency, and they're probably less likely to give you issues if you're in that space.
I see.
We're speaking with Mr. Michael Ballard, Director of Intelligence at Global Guardian, about a whole host of topics involving threat analysis really coming out of South America. We're going to continue this conversation after a real quick break. Border Report Live is back in 1 minute. Welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. Joining us now is Mr. Michael Ballard, Director of Intelligence at Global Guardian.
Really, thank you. Mr. Ballard, we've been talking about South America, primarily Venezuela. We've also been talking about the Caribbean, Haiti. But one of the hotspots on the Global Guardian map just released is Mexico. And I have to ask you, why is Mexico still a hotspot? I mean, the reason I say this is because our president, President Sheinbaum, goes on TV, shows the homicide chart saying, oh, everything's going down. This past weekend, she was visiting the port of Mazatlan in the state of Sinaloa. So why is Mexico still a hotspot right now in the continent?
Yeah, Mexico is a very interesting, has a very interesting security dynamic. Those dynamics are pretty different depending on where you're going and where you're looking. And you could be going to, Mexico City, Monterrey, relatively safe cities that have issues with, petty theft and some violent crime like any other large metro cities in the world. But when we look at holistically, some of the risks to travelers in other places that along the border in Sinaloa, Jalisco, Michoacan, Guerrero, some other places, the risks and the impact of those risks is pretty severe in many cases, right? Think about kidnapping for ransom. You think about being just collateral damage from some of these really large scale shootouts that occur between either rival cartels, factions within the same cartel. We've seen this going on in Sinaloa, or if you have law enforcement trying to carry out an arrest operation or a bust, and they run into an up-armored, right, a monstruo, a vehicle, and there's large shootouts. I mean, we saw this, what they call the culicanazos, these large kind of chaotic events that happened when they tried to arrest, I think it was Ovidio Guzman several years ago. You had planes at the Culiacan airport getting hit with bullets. They had to shut down operations there. Obviously, we don't have a ton of clients, and not a ton of Americans are traveling to places like Culiacan or, think about some of the other border cities. There are a lot of business that happens in those, though, and those are vitally important to some of the cartels. So for us, it's a little bit about, while the risk is maybe not the risk is a moderate risk of these things happening. The impact of them is pretty severe, and that kind of goes into part of that weighting for us.
Yeah, what I always tell people from Mexico who kind of question some of the coverage as far as violence is, well, okay, maybe your part of the city is safe, but what about this other part of the city, your city, where all these murders and violent acts are happening? I guess the same is true for the country as a whole. We might be able to visit Mazatlan, Cancun, Cozumel, but maybe we shouldn't go to places like Culiacan or the mountains of western Chihuahua, where we just reported of another, like you say, one of those monster trucks being used by the cartels, armed with a machine gun capable of shooting at helicopters. So,
Yep.
what are some of the hotspots right now in Mexico that people in the U.S. should avoid? What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean the battle in Sinaloa is still raging between the sons of El Chapo and La Maiza, the sons of El Mayo, or the followers of El Mayo. I didn't watch it, but there's just a video I saw a couple days ago of a hitman for Los Chapitos basically being tortured live, right? So and killed, and these types of incidents are happening still constantly in Culiacan, in Sinaloa, north to south. You've got something like almost 2,000 people have been killed so far in the last year since that kind of cartel de Sinaloa conflict really started. Doesn't show too much signs of stopping, but from what I've read and folks I've talked to, it seems like the Maiza faction is going to eventually win out here. They have better alliances, better support with CJNG, or potential alliances with CJNG, CDN. I've heard rumors about an alliance there. It feels a little bit like the Los Chapitos are slowly but surely losing that a little bit. But when you look at hotspots, Guanajuato comes to mind. There have been dozens and dozens of shootings at bars in the state. This is a pretty common theme that we've seen in Guanajuato, in Michoacan, and some other places, Jalisco, where you have cartels. They use tire shops, mechanics, garages. They have bars, restaurants that are either cartel owned. They are fronts for money laundering, and they get targeted by the rival groups. And so these are real hotspots. Guanajuato as a state, and there's that kind of valley of, what is it, Irapuato, Salamanca, Celaya, tons of violence there. Doesn't really impact our travelers too much, but if you're you're a local, you could easily get caught up in one of these bar shootings where they're trying to hit someone else. And then I would also add kind of an interesting note, is you may have seen this in Mexico City the other day. There was a shooting overnight of a salon owner in the upscale neighborhood of Polanco. Something that we don't really see too much of is that kind of violence in a neighborhood like that in Mexico City. And it raises questions about, was this salon owner, was this a front for money laundering? Was he part of a criminal organization, or was he, what I think more likely is, a victim of extortion and stopped paying up, wasn't able to pay up, and plato plomo, as they say. So those are some hotspots that we're looking at right now.
All right, so the cartels are real. The cartel violence is real in Mexico. And that brings me to my next question, and that is, the U.S. keeps pushing for action against these cartels, either by the U.S. in U.S. soil or by Mexico. And there's even the possibility that we've been talking about for months of American action in Mexico. What's the latest on that, Mr. Ballard? What can we expect? I know that we just had a couple of transfers of several dozen cartel leaders to the U.S. What can we expect in coming days?
Yeah, I think you'll probably see more of that activity in the near term, as far as kind of exchanges, more diplomatic action. But for me, we see what's happening off the coast of Venezuela, the justification for these strikes, designating these groups as foreign terrorist organizations. I think it would not be surprising if you did see eventually, a Predator drone strike in the mountains of Sinaloa, or somewhere in Jalisco, where there was, a confirmed whereabouts of a cartel leader, El Mencho, or one of the Maizas, and potentially with some, maybe reluctant approval from Mexican President Sheinbaum there. But the Sheinbaum administration is very, very, hesitant, and really does not want any type of U.S. Kinetic activity in Mexico, let alone boots on the ground. So I don't think that's likely. I think you're going to see the U.S. maybe say, handle your business, or get this situation under control, get the border under control with drugs and arms and cash and money laundering, or we're going to be forced to take action and take these guys out if we have good intelligence on it. So I think it's going to be mostly used as a little bit of a stick there of, kind of do this, or we're going to have to take matters into our own hands. But it's a very interesting time for sure.
Right. A lot of our viewership is from South Texas, across from the states of Tamaulipas, Nuevo León. We've talked about the Sinaloa cartel on the Pacific coast. What's going on? What's the latest that you hear as far as the cartel activity on the eastern portion of Mexico? Are the Northeastern cartel still at war with the Gulf cartel? What's the latest that you've heard of that?
Yeah, it's been relatively quiet. You have a pretty interesting, history of what's happened in that whole area in the last 5, 6, 8 years. With the Zetas have really kind of disappeared. They've turned into the CDN. A little bit of the old school Zetas still in pockets. You have the Gulf cartel doesn't really exist as a whole entity as it once did. You now have the different splinter groups that kind of control the various border cities. So you have the Cyclones, the Scorpions, the Metros, that all kind of, control, was it Matamoros and Nuevo Laredo and some of these other cities along the border. And there is a little bit of conflict still in between those cities that we'll see. And you'll sometimes see, the U.S. consulate or embassy will issue a warning of, avoid this area. There's an active shootout. There's been, checkpoints along these different highways. But it's from my perspective, it's, I think, improved a little bit as far as the amount of extortion that's happening. Monterrey used to be, way back used to be you think about the casino fire and the power and the influence that Los Zetas had over that city, and how it's really made a turnaround. And by no means are those border cities safe, I would say, but certainly an improvement, I think, from past years. But I would also add, you see what's happened with the Sinaloa cartel and how quickly it can really devolve into violence. And if there is a power vacuum, if somebody gets picked up and arrested and extradited and they're no longer in the picture, that tends to lead to more violence, at least in the short term, until things, kind of settle themselves out.
I see. Rudy?
Well, we've been speaking with Mr. Michael Ballard, Director of Intelligence at Global Guardian. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I wish we could continue this conversation for another couple hours, to be honest with you, because it's very interesting. But hopefully we can call again on you again, sir, in the future, and we appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
All right, and stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 1 minute. And welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. We were just speaking with Director of Intelligence for Global Guardian, Mr. Michael Ballard, about essentially what was our own personalized threat analysis for a couple countries that we cover here on Border Report. And if you're just tuning in to the program as we kind of wrap up for the day, I wanted to remind you can always get more on the program and other stories that our team, like Julian over in El Paso, Sandra Sanchez here in South Texas, and Salvador Rivera in San Diego are working on. But don't forget, too, you can listen to this episode. It'll be out in just a couple hours in audio form as Border Report Live brings you the stories shaping the U.S.-Mexico border, real-time updates, expert and voices from both sides of the border now in podcast form. So you can listen at those places at the bottom of your screen there, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and the iHeartRadio app. Just an incredible conversation today. One of those days that you really truly wish that this program was like 3 hours long, because I have a feeling we could have continued this conversation for at least that much longer. Well, that's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much to our guest again, Mr. Michael Ballard from Global Guardian. Thank you so much to our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendez. My name's Rudy Mideles. We'll see you all tomorrow.